Welcome to Season 10 of the Trust Show podcast. You know, I thought it would be hard to record an episode every week, but after more than 100 episodes, I find it harder to not record an episode in the week that I take a break between seasons. Anyway, if there's one shift in how we work that resulted from the COVID pandemic, it's that we embrace the possibility of working remotely or hybrid, where some work is done remotely and some at the office. I visited that topic in Season 8, Episode 5 of this podcast, but it has been 6 months since then, and I learned and thought a lot about that since. Obviously, the first question that comes to mind is, what did remote or hybrid work do to productivity? And obviously, if it hurts productivity, we shouldn't embrace it. And at the same time, if it increases productivity, we certainly should. Looking at research revealed results in both directions, which is troubling by itself and caused me to wonder how accurate and free of confirmation bias that research is. But the most revealing study was one done by Microsoft in late 2022. When asked whether remote work increase or reduce productivity, 87% of employees said that it did, but only 12% of leaders agreed. So I guess it really depends on who you ask. Working remotely also has trust implications. It relies on trust, but it also affects trust. The purpose of this episode is not to prove whether remote or hybrid work increases productivity or not, or even prove the relationship that it has with trust. It's to give 8 specific pieces of advice on how to maintain and even grow trust while working remotely or hybrid. Right after this. Welcome to the Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? The first advice is to consider that remote work or even hybrid is not right for every job or every task. You know, there are different jobs. When in a study back in 2022, employees were asked whether they were offered by their companies to work remotely, and 58% said that they were offered to work completely remotely. 87% of those accepted, but it varied with different industries. So the computer industry, for example, was 89%. So 89% said, sure, I'm going to work remotely. I have a friend who started working remotely for a company in California. He lives in Texas, and he almost never went there. I mean, it was always working remotely. He's a software programmer. Programmers, for the most part, work independently. I mean, they have to coordinate their work and make sure that everybody's working on the right part, and that there is a lot of good information that's available for each one of them on somebody else or on other people's work. But in general, most of the work is done independently, individually. I remember as a software engineer, software and hardware engineer, that I could work from anywhere because it was just me, the computer, and whatever development system I was working on. So 89% of people working in the computer industry. By the way, he started working there remotely long before the pandemic. I would say this was about 5 years before the pandemic. And that was the only way he worked since then. Had nothing to do with the pandemic. So 89% of the computer industry people said, yeah, sure, I'll work remote. Why not? Frankly, it may even give me more peace and more quiet time to work and be more productive. And I do believe that software programmers are probably more productive working remotely, individually, with no interference. But look at the other side. How about so in that study, food preparation industry, only 29% said they'll work remotely. I'm trying to figure out how exactly do you work in the food preparation industry remotely. Think about pilots, think about surgeons, think about truck drivers. Now, the thing is that those different roles may exist in the same company. So within the same company, you may have people that really their job can only be done at the office. They have to physically be located somewhere. Maybe not the office, but somewhere. And they have to be there, like pilots. That's what if the pilot unions would start protesting and decide that they want to work remotely? Would you board an airplane with no pilot? Autopilot can do so far. Surgeons, same thing. I'm going to operate surgery remotely. Even if it was possible with the robots that they have today that can operate remotely, I'm not going to want to be under surgery by a surgeon who's remotely trying to operate a robot that has my chest open. Truck driver, same thing. Unless, again, we get to driverless autonomous trucks. So the same company may have different jobs that would require employees to be at the office or away from the office. And that should be okay. We shouldn't try and have a one-size-fits-all. There are different tasks within a specific job. Some tasks that require individual contribution, deliverables that are standalone versus deliverables that are team deliverables, teamwork, some coordination may be required. So even within a task, within a job, a specific job, you can break down the tasks into tasks that can be done remotely and even more productively remotely versus tasks that can only be done in location and with other employees. And I think that the key word here is other employees. So tip number one, or habit number one, whatever we call it, is that remote work is not appropriate for every job or every task. So don't make general policies about it. Consider each job and task independently. The second consideration is that working remotely is not right for every person. We have different personalities. Part of it is being an extrovert or an introvert, for example. I can tell you about myself. I'm an extrovert. I'm an extreme extrovert, which is kind of weird if you consider my childhood, but I am. And what it means is not necessarily that I need the opportunity to express myself, as it is that the best ideas come to me when I can brainstorm with other people. So I was just telling my daughter this morning that I'm having trouble with developing some mathematical model for something. I love math. Hey, sue me. And I was telling her that if I had 30 minutes of her time and tried to explain it to her, in 30 minutes, I'll finalize that mathematical model. But right now, it's taking me days because I'm working on my own. So there are personality aspects that would make remote work, which is working on your own, better for some people and worse for others. I mean, to me, I really thrive when I'm around other people. If you told me that the job would be completely remote, I would frown. I would have an issue with that. There's obviously the benefits of working from home. And initially, I work from home. My office is at my home. And I got used to it, but it didn't come naturally. Think about different Myers-Briggs personality types. Think about Pet Lencioni's working genius types and other personality types. Some people are going to thrive working remotely. Some will thrive working at the office, and vice versa. It requires self-discipline. Part of the self-discipline is depends on the environment that you have. Do you have an environment? Can you create an environment that is distraction free, or would you have distraction? You know what? We're considering getting a dog now. We had a dog many, many years ago. Now we're considering doing it again. And one of the biggest considerations in my mind is I'm working from home. That dog is going to be here. Will it let me work? How far am I from the refrigerator? I mean, I gained, I was so proud of how much I lost weight using a process based on which I built the 7-step process, trust habits process. And I gained all of it back when I was in very short distance from the refrigerator. So that's part of it. There is equipment that's required to work. I mean, there's equipment that you have at the office that's readily available. So think about a printer, think about your screens and so on. So there are things that need to be in the environment for a person to be able to work remotely. But we have to consider the fact that not every person can or has the personality to work individually and remotely. You know, it's like asking, do people want autonomy? And the answer is almost definitely yes. Of course, they need autonomy. They need freedom. They need to have their control over how they do the job. Not what job, but how they do the job. Sure, but it's not 100% of the people. I have my own personal experience in people who wanted autonomy versus people who did not. There was a study done in, I think, 2014 in England that showed that 78% of people said, yes, we want autonomy, we embrace autonomy, we thrive with autonomy. 22% said they didn't. So there is a personality component to it, which I think if you want to be productive, if you want to improve productivity, allow working from home. And again, there's no doubt that there are benefits for people working remotely, not just to the people, but to the company itself, you know, smaller office space and so on, less electricity. But you have to make sure that you assess the personality of the people, their willingness, their ability, not just the task, not just the job, which is what I talked about in the previous habit, but do they have the personality? Do they have the self-discipline? Do they have the right environment? Can they create the right environment? Do they have the right equipment? You may need to provide them with the equipment, you know, and it's not just a laptop. It could be a printer, the screens, everything. I mean, you can't ask somebody to work from home 8 hours a day or whatever with subpar equipment that's nowhere near what they would get if they worked at the office. So that's a consideration. Provide training, really training on how to work remotely and be effective and be productive working remotely. And then the other thing is you have to assess that on a periodic, on a regular basis. Provide the training, get the assessment. Is it working? And make sure that it really does work. Let's not get to the point where the employee would say, yeah, it works, it increases my productivity, and the leader or the company says, no, it doesn't. So to summarize, remote work isn't right for every person. You need to consider the personality, consider and assess the personality, the environment, the equipment, and other factors. You need to provide training. You need to provide equipment. And you need to assess this on a regular basis. The third tip is not only for leaders, but for the employees themselves. And that is avoid assumptions and covert expectations. You know, I remember when I started working in the first company here in the US, my boss, the CEO, said to me, when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. If you take the word assume and you break it out, you're going to get the ass, you, me. So when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. You think it's coincidental that the word assume is made of those three? Actually, it is. I guess it is. But here's what happens. Why do we make assumptions? We make assumptions because there is a minimum level of knowledge we must have to feel safe, to feel comfortable, that we have enough information. The problem is that initially, with first impressions, with first interactions, we don't have that level of information in the form of facts. So what do? Our brain fills in the gaps with assumptions. The problem is that those assumptions are not necessarily true. Now, when you work in the office environment, it's not, again, necessarily the office environment as it is everybody's working at the same place, then there's hardly a probability, an opportunity to make such assumptions. You can easily ask a person, but when we work remotely, it's a lot easier to, do I send an email now? Do I call them? Do I send a Zoom call or any other tool? No, I'm just going to make the assumption, and that's bad. So the first step in this is to recognize that you're making assumptions. And instead of making those assumptions, first of all, by recognizing it, you need to separate what you know from what you assume. So what do I know that's a fact? Now, by the way, I heard about it from another person. Is it an assumption that they're making, or is that a fact? So you have to be careful with, what I call the fifth law of trust. Trust is transferable. When you get information from somebody else, you have to also ask yourself, do I know that this is a fact, or is this an assumption that they're making, or an assumption that somebody else is making that they're conveying to you? Okay, so separate what you know from what you assume. Don't make assumptions. Ask questions. Okay, can't be clear about that. So that's the assumptions part. The second part is expectations. You know how it's like somebody disappoints you because you expected more from them, or you expected something specific from them and they didn't do it? So you are disappointed with them? Of course, they didn't know that you expected them because you never made it clear to them that you expected it. Once again, when you're all in the same physical location, it's a lot easier to say, hey, this is what I want from you. But hey, this happens in the office too. This is something that happens when people are all in the same location. And I expect one person to do something and they didn't do it. And then I'm disappointed. And, one of the things that's the hardest to ever hear is, I expected more from you. It's like, why didn't you say so? So the second part of it is make your expectations clear. Okay, especially when we're working remote. It's more important when we're working remote. And the third component is feedback. The feedback, if you're in the same physical location, sometimes you don't need to give feedback, or you don't give feedback intentionally. You give feedback unintentionally because your body language says it already to the other person. So, even more importantly, when we work remotely, when we don't see each other, to give feedback. And I'm not going to go too deep into how to give feedback because I've done that. I actually recorded, I think, 5 or 6 episodes in, I think it was season 4, on giving feedback and taking feedback. So here I'm just going to summarize it. Give feedback like you care. Take feedback like it matters. So I'll summarize the third habit, or the third tip to increase productivity and maintain trust while working remotely or hybrid. Avoid assumptions and covert expectations. Separate fact from assumptions. Don't assume, ask. Make expectations clear. Give feedback like you care, and take feedback like it matters. Number 4 has to do with communications, with effective communications. So the first thing that I want you to think about is, what is communication? Communication is an idea that forms in your brain that needs to end up in another person's brain, the person you're communicating with. Now, it starts in your brain, then it comes out of your mouth. Now, when it comes out of your mouth, it might be a little different than what started in your brain. Do you know the feeling when you say something and you go, did I say this out loud? Or this sounded so much better in my head? Well, that happens. So there's already one distortion to the idea that started in your head. Then from your mouth, it goes to their ear. This is where it's subject to audio interference, to sound interference, to maybe an air conditioner working, maybe other people talking at the same time. So they didn't really get exactly what you were saying. Another distortion. And the third level of distortion is what comes through their ears and goes through their brain has to go through their cognitive processes, which are subject to bias and their knowledge and so on. And so the idea that ends in their brain is not what started in your brain. So it's really important that you remember that what you say is not what they hear. And one of the tools to deal with that is to close the loop on communication. Make sure that communication is acknowledged and understood. So whether it's you're the communicator and you ask, what did you get from what I said, or can you repeat it back? Or if you're the person receiving it, just, even if you're not being asked, just repeat what you were told. Okay. The second part is, and I'm going to talk more about increasing time and intimacy, but when we communicate, a big part of communication is the body language, the tone of voice, and facial expressions. And very important to trust is the consistency of the words you're using and body language. And so, again, I'll talk more about that later. So just increase time and intimacy, it would improve communications. Now, there are two things that can happen. One is that we have not enough information. That reduces trust. When people hold on to information, that reduces trust. And sometimes people do that just as an act of control, of power. I control who gets information. Bosses and leaders that tend to be in the center, kind of a star topography where they're in the middle and they control the information. All information must reach them, but they control who gets what. That not only reduces trust, it reduces productivity and effectiveness of the organization. But then on the flip side, too much communication can be overwhelming. Everybody copying everybody on everything. And it's like you get to the point where you miss critical pieces of information simply because you get too much. The way to solve this, and again, in a hybrid environment, in a remote environment, that's even more critical. Make information available and easily accessible. So information has to be available. It should not, within restrictions, there's confidentiality and other things that you need to consider. But make the information available, make it easily accessible to people. So everybody who needs information will have access to it. But communicate. So this is kind of passive. So you make information available somewhere. There are a lot of tools for that, where you can deposit information, company wikis, and I don't know. There's just a lot of tools that are available for that. Slack is one. So you make it available and accessible to everyone. That's kind of reactive or passive. But actively, the act of communicating a message is active. And so communicate what is necessary based on the needs, based on the interests of the other person. So don't copy everyone if they don't need to know it. Make that information available to them, but communicate to other people what they need to know, what that they're interested in right now. Of course, it gets a little tricky if all of a sudden halfway through the communication thread, somebody else needs to know something. So you need to add them. And now the question is, when somebody responds and does reply all, then do they reply to everyone plus the new person? You have to control that. There's no doubt. But just don't overwhelm people with communication, because that doesn't build productivity or even trust. Now, here's another one. I read someone who posted I'm going to call it a soundbite that says, and I'm paraphrasing, it's better to not reply to an email than reply with an unthoughtful answer. I'm paraphrasing. Well, I understand. I agree. Don't give an answer. If somebody asks you a question that requires you to think about it, don't just give an answer without thinking about it. But we have to also keep in mind that more than 50% of our email in our inbox or that is trying to get into our inbox is spam, which means that we have stronger and stronger spam filters, which means that there is a higher and higher likelihood that a message never reached you. You need to let the other person know that you got a message. If somebody sent you a message and you need to think about that, let them know that you received the message, that you will think about it, give them a timeline to when you believe you'll be able to respond, and obviously respond, because then you're going to lose their trust if you said, I'm going to respond by Friday, and you don't, or you forget about it. So keep that in mind, that you will need to think about what the answer is, but just do me a favor, reply, let them know that you got it, let them know that you'll think about it. Because they don't have a way to know that you even received it. I mean, you tell me, has there never been a situation where you sent an email and the person on the other side actually did not receive it? You didn't get an answer from them, but because they actually did not receive it? So you may be thinking, oh, they're thinking about it. No, they're not. They just didn't receive it. So it really builds trust and productivity when we actually reply and say, I don't have an answer for you right now. I'll give you an answer within a week. I don't have an answer and I don't have time to think about that. That's fine too. That's much better than you just ignoring that email. Let them know that you received it. Last thing is, never ever use BCC unless the people in the message actually know that there is someone BCC'd. I mean, one of the worst things that you can do to trust is when you send me an email. Let's do it the other way around. Imagine that I just sent you an email. In that email, I criticized you. I gave you some constructive, in air quotes, feedback on something that you've done. It's obviously not good feedback. It's bad feedback. You've done something. Now, you need that feedback because it will make you better. But it's only between you and me. That's fine. When all of a sudden, you get a reply from your boss to the same message. How did my boss get that message? Oh, wait. I must have put them in BCC. What do you think about me now? Do you trust me? I mean, the whole idea of BCC is to hide the fact that I copied one more person from you. Don't use BCC. And if you do, I mean, I'll give you an example of when I use BCC. I use BCC when I send an email to myself and copy like 200 people, and I don't want everybody to start going reply all and for everybody to know everybody else's email addresses. And that's typically not within an organization. I use BCC when somebody introduces me to a third person and I move the person who made the introduction to BCC and I say, I moved so-and-so to BCC, so we're not going to burden their inbox when we reply to each other. But otherwise, don't use BCC to hide the fact that you copied one more person. Number 5, use more empathy. Now, it's important that I explain that when I say empathy, I don't mean compassion or sympathy or pity. That's not empathy. One of the components of my relative trust model is positivity, the positivity of an interaction. And the positivity is made of 2 subcomponents. And that's no BS, no bullshit, and empathy. There was a study done by Centus and others in 2017 that found that in 51 years in 78 countries, they used the World Values Survey database, which is an open database to find information that's pretty longitudinal across multiple countries. And what they found based on that database is that in 51 years in 78 countries, the level of individualism in both practice and values has increased 12%. Now, you may think 51 years, 12%, not a big deal, but in English-speaking countries, they isolated them. The number was 60 to 69%. We are more individual. We are less empathetic. We care less about the other person. One of the exercises that I like to use in my workshops is I take the number, whether it's 6 or 9, and put it sideways, kind of let it lie as if it's lying on the floor. And I ask people, what number do you see here? And some of them see 6, some of them see 9. And then I put pictures of 2 people from their perspective. What would they see? One of them would see 9, one of them would see 6. And so it's pretty obvious that there are 2 sides to almost every story. Another thing that you must consider is that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not familiar with that, it's a pyramid of hierarchy. It's really a hierarchy of needs, where at the bottom you have your physiological needs. This is your needs for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction needs. Until you satisfy those, you can't even think about the above layer, the layer above that, which, by the way, is pretty important. Safety, personal security, employment, your ability to pay rent, resources, health, property, owning property. And only once you satisfy those needs can you even free your mind to think about love and belonging. So friendships, intimacy, family, sense of connection. Above that is your self-esteem, respect you're going to get. So you care about the respect you're going to get only if you covered the layers of love and belonging, safety, physiological needs. Only when those are covered, you can think about self-esteem, or at the highest level, self-actualization. Now, you might be at the self-actualization layer. This is what you worry about. You want to be the most you can be, but you know why? Because everything below that you've covered or is covered for you. The person you're communicating with may not. They may worry about having shelter. They may worry about, paying rent. They may worry about their personal security. Empathy is not pity or compassion or sympathy. It's your ability to see things from the other person's perspective as if you were them. Now, I talk at a very high level and at the value level, but sometimes it is so much simpler and down to earth. So I'll give you an example. When you schedule a meeting and you invite somebody to that meeting and you send a meeting request and you put it on the calendar, what do you call the meeting? I can't tell you how many times something shows up and meeting invite shows up on my calendar and it's called meeting with Yoram. Why? Because it makes sense to the other person that they're meeting with me, with Yoram. On my calendar, it doesn't make so much sense because I'm not meeting with myself. And from this, looking at my calendar, I can't tell who is the person I'm going to be meeting with. Just see things from the other person's perspective as if you were them. And by the way, a big part of empathy is listening to the other person, not jumping into answering it. Stephen Covey said it the best. He said, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So listen with the intent to understand. See things from the other person's perspective as if you were them, not you. It's very important in any work environment, but doubly important when you work remotely or hybrid. Number 6, increase time and intimacy. So just to explain what I'm talking about, when I say increase time, I mean increase the frequency of interactions, increase the length of interactions within reason, and increase the predictability, the cadence, the rhythm of interactions. And when I talk about intimacy, I'm talking about increasing the in-person, face-to-face interactions, even if it does take place over video conferencing. And I'll tell you why. So those 2 components, when I talk about my relative trust model, the what you do components, they start with positivity. I talked about that. That's made of no BS and empathy, but it's accelerated by the time and intimacy components. Okay, so let's talk about time. One of the best examples that I give for time is that I gave it in my third TED Talk on ChatGPT, and one of the reasons why it's being blocked in many, many classrooms at different levels of the education system is simply because the universities, the professors, they don't know how to handle it. They don't know if they can trust it. They don't know what they can trust it with, simply because they haven't spent enough time with it. Think about cruise control. When cruise control came out, I remember not trusting it. I was always worried that it's going to lock my car in a certain speed and I'm going to crash into the car in front of me. And I didn't trust it until I used it once and twice and three times and more and more and more. And the more I used it, the more I trust it. Building trust is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to happen overnight. Now think about autonomous car. Are you willing to sit in the back seat of a self-driving car when nobody is sitting in the front? Let the car drive itself completely on computers? By the way, you're probably going to hate me if I told you that, there are auto landing systems in airplanes, and when visibility is too low and you're still landing in an airport without any visibility, the autopilot actually lands the plane. But since you're gonna hate me for that, I won't tell you that. But we don't trust autonomous cars simply because we haven't spent enough time with them. But the more time we spend with them, the more we're gonna trust them. So this is the component of time. So the more time you spend together with the team, or just any two people, the more time, the longer, the more predictable that time is. The more they're going to trust each other. So you're going to be building trust. Now, obviously, working remotely, working from home, reduces the time. And it reduces the intimacy because you're not in the same place at the same time. You're not meeting in person, face to face, which is why video conferencing is important. But that's something you need to keep in mind. So let's talk about the intimacy. And the intimacy is really the intimacy of communications, where the lowest intimacy is email messages or text messages that leave a lot to read between the lines. And you remember what I said about not making assumptions. Well, you make assumptions because you read between the lines, because it's a very low level of intimacy of such a message. Albert Mehrabian is known for what's called the 738-55 rule. And what he said was that we like other people, or our feelings towards other people are determined 7% by the words that we use, 38% by the tone of voice, and 55% by our body language. He published that in a book called Silent Messages in 1971. That rule, the 738-55 rule, was so misinterpreted so many times that he actually came out on BBC to explain that it was misinterpreted. But beyond that, I read the original research he did in 68 and 69, and I would challenge reaching those numbers. But the bottom line is, forget the actual numbers. The intimacy of our communications, the higher it is, the more we build trust. And one of the main reasons, and here is something that I want to read from his introduction to his own book. He said, when our words contradict the silent messages contained within them, others mistrust what we say. And that's critical. That's something we need to keep in mind, that when we don't get enough body language associated with the words, we make assumptions. When we get body language, either we remove assumptions because we feel that the message is consistent, we know we can trust it and trust the other person, or we feel that the other person is lying to us or is not saying what they mean because their body language is inconsistent with their words. So to summarize this, especially in the remote, especially in remote from home environment, you have to increase the time and intimacy of interactions. Again, I'm going back to the first thing that I said, not for every job, not for every task, but you have to make sure that you build time and intimacy, because you build the time. This is how you build trust in the team. or between any number of people, not just between two people. And you may have to do that at the office. And this is where we're going into the hybrid model. But you have to find a way. You have to keep track on time and intimacy within teams and within people when you are in the remote or hybrid environment. Number 7. How can you monitor that your employees are really working? I mean, if you really care about productivity, you obviously want to make sure that they're really working because, they're working at home, or they are at least at home. They may reply to an email every now and then just to make it look like they're working, but they're really not working. Well, first of all, you will see that in reduced productivity. But should you wait that long? So there are all kinds of software tools. Now, this is a trick question, by the way. How can you monitor that your employees are really working? So the answer to that question is that there are software tools that I found quite a few that would allow you to track your employees, and you can see what projects they're working on. And of course, it's going to put some burden on them to report what they're working on right now. But you install some kind of software in their computer, and it will track them, and you can tell that they were really working. It can even detect that their mouse is moving, so it can track how much their mouse has been moving, and you can tell that they're by the computer then. Of course, if you go to YouTube and you search mouse jiggler or mouse moving device, you're going to find, first of all, you're going to find YouTube videos that are going to show you how to build something with Lego. And it will show you that, using a motor and so on, it will keep on moving the mouse to make it look like you are working. And you're going to see another video that uses an Arduino development board and a 3D printed box of some kind with a servo that would move the mouse and make it look like it's moving. Of course, you can find tools like that online. And the funny thing is they say that you need to do that. And those are optical, by the way. Oh, there's even an app called Mouse Jiggler. It's really cool where your phone will have a pattern, a visual pattern. And since the mouse is optical, that pattern changing would make the mouse think that it's moving, even though it's not really moving. And of course, what they say is that the purpose of these tools is to prevent the computer from going to sleep, because the computer would go to sleep after some period of inactivity. Well, that's bull. You can just go to the power settings of the computer and say, I don't want the computer to go to sleep. That's not the real reason. The real reason is because your boss is monitoring that you're working, and because of that, you need to show that you're working. And guess what? You're not going to work just to show your boss, just because your boss is trying to track you, trying to monitor you. Trust is reciprocal. That's the 6th law of trust. If you trust someone and you show them that you trust them, they will behave in a trustworthy way. Because if you trust someone and they know that you trust them and they believe that you actually trust them more than they should be trusted, more than the level of trust that they have earned with you, it puts them in something that's called cognitive dissonance. And that's a bad feeling. And so to avoid that feeling, they're going to behave in a trustworthy way to justify the trust that they know you have in them. But that only happens if you trust them and you show them that you trust them. By the way, it works the other way around too. If you don't trust them and you show them that you don't trust them, like using monitoring software on their computers, they will not behave in a trustworthy way. And they're going to come up with all kinds of tools that would bypass your lack of trust in them. I remember in one of the companies I worked for, the IT manager came and installed, or not installed, but removed the administrative rights to the computers from all the employees. So only the IT department would have administrative rights. And I said, why are you doing that? Oh, because I don't want you to put all kinds of bugs and access websites you shouldn't have and so on. I told him, how long do you think it's going to take for me to bypass whatever hurdle you put in front of me? Educate me. Educate me where I can expose the company to risks, and I will avoid it. But when you don't trust me to do it, I'm going to find a way around it because I don't need to earn your trust. I don't have it. By the way, I'm not a big advocate to trust unlimited. And you know, I'm not crazy about Ronald Reagan's trust but verify. I'm not sure how you can trust and verify at the same time. Ernest Hemingway had a great quote. He said, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. Now, I'm not advocating to unlimited trust in a person that doesn't deserve it. Because there are risks to you, to the organization, if you put that level of trust in someone that should not be trusted at that level, or dramatically more than the level of trust they should be trusted with. And other than risks, you're opening yourself to disappointments. You're opening yourself to lose trust in them in a much greater way than if you trusted them only a little more than they deserve. But the thing is, it's a cycle. It's a cycle that if you trust them just a little more than what you believe you should trust them, or the level you believe you should trust them, then you're getting into the cycle of trust and trustworthiness rather than cycle of distrust and untrustworthiness. Bottom line is, if you feel that you have to monitor your employees, you have the wrong employees, or there's something wrong with your attitude. Trust them. Show them you trust them. They will behave in a trustworthy way. And if they don't, you have the wrong employees. Period. Start with trust. Last point, number 8, goes to employee engagement. Employee engagement is important. Employee engagement creates trust. Employee engagement relies on trust. You have high level of trust, you have high employee engagement. Actually, this wasn't even something that I found in a study. Paul Zak found it in a study that he did of more than 1,000 people. He found a 76% plus 76% correlation to the level of actual engagement, employee engagement, and the level of trust that was reported. And by the way, he only went from the bottom quartile to the top quartile. That's not over the entire 100%. That's just bottom quartile to top quartile. Increasing that level of trust would increase actual engagement by 76%. So engagement is important. And engagement leads to a lot of very positive things. There was a recent Gallup study that showed that we currently have 23% employees are actively engaged. 18% are actively disengaged. They don't want to work there, and they make it very clear and very public to everyone. And 59% of the employees are what we call quiet quitting. Those employees have retired. Don't get it wrong. They retired. They just didn't tell their boss that they retired. They still show up to the office. So engagement is a problem. So what do? We have an engagement survey, employee engagement survey. Well, there are a few problems with employee engagement survey. So I'm going to skip the first problem. And I talked about that in a previous podcast episode. I believe it was in season 9. And the first problem is, do you have the right questions and the risks associated with averages? I'm going to skip that. Go to that episode to hear more. I think it's called the half-truths of employee engagement surveys or something like that. The problem is this. The problem is that when the level of trust that the employees have in the company is very low, they don't trust that an anonymous survey is really anonymous. By the way, if you want to know why, the software that produces the survey typically would, if we need full engagement or full response to the survey, one of the things we want to do is make sure that all employees answered, right? And so they get an email that said, you haven't answered your survey. Do you think at that point that the employee thinks that the survey was anonymous? No. By the way, they don't know that you don't know that they didn't answer, and you may know that they didn't answer. Even if you do know, you don't necessarily know what the answers are, and it really depends on who's conducting it, how they're conducting it. If you're using a reputable source for that survey, then you can probably trust that your boss really doesn't know. But do you really trust that? So when the level of trust is very low, they don't trust the anonymity of their responses. They fear retaliation if their answers are not positive, because most people don't like taking bad news. So, I'm going to tell you what you really need to hear, but you're not going to take it well. And so why do I want to do that? So what happens when the level of trust is very low, the responses are actually pretty positive. But they're positive not because the reality is positive. They're positive because the people filling those surveys, they don't trust the anonymity of the survey, and they don't trust that you're not going to retaliate. That's why they're positive. As the level of trust starts going up, this is a funny thing that happens. The responses, the reported engagement goes down. But it doesn't go down because engagement goes down. Actual engagement goes down. It goes down because we are trusting the anonymity more. We're not afraid of retaliation, so we're giving a more accurate response. Now, there is one more danger in an employee engagement survey, and that's many of the companies, what they do is they just they do the survey, the engagement survey, just so that their employees would feel that they really care about engagement. Something you need to know, when you do an engagement survey, you pull the pin out of the grenade. And there's a limited time until that fuse reaches explosives and the grenade explodes. And if all you did is the engagement survey, and a long time has passed, and you either misrepresented the answers, which I've seen happen in the past as well, or you just don't do anything about it, you're hurting engagement. My answer to this is really simple. Keep your ears to the ground. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't just do an employee engagement survey because that's what's going to tell you if they're engaged or not, if the level of trust is high or not. Just keep your ears to the ground all the time. Get the sense something is not happening, something is not right. Fix it. Because otherwise you're burying your head in the sand, and then all of a sudden you need someone to tell you, an engagement survey to tell you that you have low engagement. Or worse at all, the level of trust is so low that it's actually telling you that engagement is good, when in reality it's not. So finally, just build trust instead of measuring engagement. Just focus on building trust. Trust me, it will build engagement and everything else. Research showed that. Well, this is the end of the first episode of Season 10, longer than I thought it would take. But I didn't break it into 2 episodes, so you'll have it all in one place. And I'm going to try in this season, and maybe after that, to focus more on how. So pretty much the title of almost every episode is going to have the word how and the word trust. So something related to trust, and I'm going to show you one of the next episodes, maybe the next episode actually, is going to be on how to sell on trust and not on price, but this time with very specific tips. So I realized that in previous episodes, previous seasons, I started getting a little more philosophical, and I know that this might have been what you wanted to get. And I'm not totally abandoning the philosophy of trust and ethics and values and so on. But I want to be more prescriptive and give you tools. So this episode gave you 8 tools to use working remotely. Next episodes will give you tools to do something else, to increase trust, to know who you can trust, to build trust, and so on. May trust be with you. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these 2 questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? And can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.